Imani Carter didn't speak much. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she had learned from a young age that sometimes silence was the only way to survive the noise around you. She sat in seat 2A near the window, her back straight, her hands resting on a navy backpack folded carefully on her lap. The plane smelled like citrus-scented disinfectant and stale air conditioning. Her headphones hung around her neck, her phone tucked in her hoodie, and a hardcover book sat unopened by her side. Outside, the sky was a muted silver, the tarmac lined with blinking lights and crawling ground vehicles. It was her first time flying alone. It should have been a milestone. Instead, it already felt like a test. The first-class cabin was still filling. A man in a blazer paced a few rows up, talking loudly into a Bluetooth earpiece. A couple murmured over the drink menu. Flight attendants moved smoothly, smiling at passengers, offering assistance with luggage. It was orderly, professional, almost. But Imani could feel something in the air. Not just the cold, recycled oxygen, but that familiar current, the one that hums around you when people are watching, even if no one says a word. She knew that feeling. Too many classrooms, too many office waiting rooms, too many spaces where her presence was unexpected and somehow always questioned. But she didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't shrink. Because her godmother, Dr. Olivia Carter, had taught her better. You have the right to take up space, baby, especially the space you've earned. And Imani had earned this. She'd finished her summer STEM program with top scores, won first place in a national robotics competition. As a reward, Olivia, her mother's best friend and the closest thing to a second parent she'd ever had surprised her with a ticket to visit her research lab in Seattle. First class, round trip, paid in full. Olivia didn't believe in almosts. When she celebrated someone, she went all in. Imani glanced out the window again, her fingers brushing against the edge of the boarding pass tucked neatly in her hoodie pocket. Everything felt quiet, stable, peaceful, until it didn't. The sound came first. Sharp heels on metal flooring. Click, click, click. A woman entered the cabin from the galley, posture upright, smile mechanical. Her name tag read, Lauren Grady, and the way she scanned the rows reminded Imani of airport security agents, the kind who never smiled back and always looked for something to question. Lauren's eyes swept across the cabin until they landed on Imani. Then they stopped. Imani didn't move. She felt the gaze settle like weight across her chest. "Excuse me," Lauren said. Her voice wasn't unkind, but it was louder than it needed to be. "You're in the wrong seat." Imani blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry?" "This is first class," Lauren clarified. "Are you sure you're supposed to be up here?" Imani reached into her hoodie and pulled out the boarding pass. She held it out calmly, even as her fingers trembled just a little. "Seat 2A," she said. "That's what it says." Lauren took the pass. She didn't scan it. She just glanced at it and then at Imani again, as if trying to connect dots that didn't exist. "I think there's been a mix-up," she said. "Can I ask where your parents are?" The question dropped like a laid weight into the aisle. A few heads turned. One woman's eyes narrowed. Another man pretended not to hear. Imani sat up straighter. "I'm flying alone. My godmother booked the ticket." Lauren pursed her lips. Her voice tightened. "I understand, but I need you to move to economy for now. We'll sort this out later." "But this is my seat," Imani said, her tones still calm but firmer. "You can check the manifest." Lauren folded the boarding pass and handed it back. "You're holding up the boarding process," she said, her voice dropping the last hint of politeness. "Please move to the back." It wasn't a request, it wasn't an offer. It was a command, delivered with just enough authority to silence protest. Imani felt her face flush, not with shame, but heat. She didn't want a scene, not here, not with everyone watching and no one saying anything. She stood quietly, picked up her backpack, and walked the long aisle toward the back. Not a single passenger said a word. She took a seat near the wing. The cushion was thinner, the legroom tighter, the air stuffier. She didn't cry. She wasn't going to give them that. But her hands trembled now. Her throat ached. Because it wasn't just the injustice, it was how casual it had been. No raised voices, no accusations. Just one person's assumption, backed by silence. Imani reached for her phone. She didn't know what to say. She just started typing. "She made me leave my seat, said I didn't belong, I'm in the back now." She hit send. She didn't expect a miracle. She just needed someone to know what had happened, and she knew one person who would not let this slide. Back in D.C., Dr. Olivia Carter was reviewing FAA inspection reports when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. One line, no emojis, no exclamation points, just the truth. She sat still for a second. Then she picked up the phone, and the sky began to change. Dr. Olivia Carter never hesitated, not in meetings, not in emergencies, and certainly not when someone hurt someone she loved. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was short, almost clipped. What happened? No emojis, no punctuation, just calm intensity pressed into 2 words. Amani stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. She could almost hear Olivia's voice in her head. Steady, low, the kind of tone that made even boardroom executives sit straighter. She typed slowly. Flight attendant made me move. Said I didn't look like I belonged in first class. I showed her my ticket. She didn't care. A beat passed. Then the reply came instantly. Flight number? Amani dug into her hoodie, pulling out the crumpled boarding pass. Her fingers weren't shaking anymore, not from fear. Something else had taken over. Resolve. She typed the number and hit send. She didn't expect what came next. Stay where you are. Don't speak to anyone else. I'll handle it. That was it. 4 short sentences. But they landed with more weight than any screaming confrontation could have. Because Amani knew what "I'll handle it" meant when Olivia said it. The woman had once shut down an entire commercial fleet over a faulty maintenance report. She'd been summoned to testify before Congress on air safety. Her signature was stamped on more federal protocols than most airline execs had even read. She wasn't just someone with connections. She was the connection. And now she was on the move. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Lane was adjusting the flight plan when the red phone buzzed. Not the usual flight operations line, the secure one, the one labeled urgent. He picked up. The voice on the other end was clipped, all business. This is FAA Ground Command. We've received a complaint from Director Olivia Carter regarding a discriminatory action on board your aircraft. You are to halt taxiing and remain at the gate until further notice. This directive is non-negotiable. Captain Lane blinked. Director Carter? He'd flown U.S. senators, foreign diplomats, even a former president, but he had never been contacted directly by Olivia Carter. That meant one thing: this wasn't routine. This was an investigation in motion. He reached for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked to remain at the gate a little longer due to a brief delay. We'll provide an update shortly. The announcement rippled through the cabin. A soft chorus of sighs. A few glances exchanged. But no one suspected that the delay wasn't about weather or logistics. It was about one girl in seat 2A. Or rather, the girl who had been in seat 2A. In the back of the plane, Amani heard the announcement and felt something shift, not around her but inside her. She didn't smile, she didn't relax. But the tightness in her chest loosened slightly, because she recognized the signs. This wasn't a delay. This was the beginning of accountability. Up in first class, Lauren Grady sipped water in the galley, her lips curled into a faint smirk. The boarding process had finished smoothly. The girl had moved without incident. Everything was in order. Or so she thought. Javier Cruz, the younger flight attendant, approached quietly. Hey, about that girl earlier, he started. Lauren raised an eyebrow. What about her? I saw her ticket, he said. It looked valid. Lauren laughed softly. Lots of things look valid. I've been doing this 15 years. You learn to spot what doesn't belong. Javier's jaw tightened. She wasn't causing trouble. She was in the wrong seat, Lauren snapped. I fixed it. Javier didn't argue. But he didn't nod either. He just stepped away. Something felt off. Something felt wrong. And Lauren, still basking in her own certainty, didn't notice the wave headed her way. Because Olivia Carter wasn't making calls. She was pulling levers. Within 10 minutes, FAA compliance had logged the incident. Internal affairs at the airline had been alerted. The airport security liaison had been dispatched to the gate, and the message sent to the captain was only the beginning. Amani sat still in her economy seat. She hadn't spoken to anyone since she moved. She didn't need to. The message from Olivia replayed in her mind like a heartbeat. Stay where you are. I'll handle it. Passengers around her started checking watches. One man rang the call button. Is there a mechanical issue? Someone asked a passing crew member. We've been asked to hold at the gate, Javier replied with a forced smile. The captain will update you soon. But the smile didn't reach his eyes, because he already knew something had gone very, very wrong. Up front, Lauren passed through first class again. She adjusted a pillow here, folded a blanket there, pretending everything was fine. Then she reached seat 2A, the seat that was now empty. She smoothed the headrest as if she could erase what had happened, as if fabric could cover a fracture. A woman in pearls leaned toward her. "What's the delay?" Lauren gave her best smile. "Just a small hold, nothing serious." But her hand trembled slightly as she walked away, and for the first time, she glanced toward the cockpit door with unease. Inside the cockpit, Captain Lane's second call came through. This time, it wasn't just a directive. It was a warning. A senior FAA investigator was being dispatched to meet the flight upon landing. "Until then," the voice said, "you are not cleared for departure." A first-class miner was removed from her seat without ticket verification. "We want a full report and accountability on arrival." Captain Lane let out a low breath. He'd handled engine faults, weather reroutes, medical emergencies mid-flight. But this was bigger than airspace. He turned to his co-pilot. "We're not going anywhere." And in the back of the plane, Imani stared out the window. The runway was still. The engines were off. The lights around them blinked in time with her pulse. No one had apologized. No one had spoken up when it happened. But now, everyone was watching. Not because she had shouted, not because she had made a scene, but because she had told the truth. And the right person had listened. The second the cockpit door clicked open and Captain Lane called her name, Lauren Grady felt it. Not the turbulence of air, but of consequence. "Miss Grady." The captain's voice was calm but clipped, the kind of tone that didn't leave room for pleasantries. "Could you step up here for a moment?" Every head in the front cabin turned. Some subtly, some not. Lauren smoothed her blouse with both hands before making her way forward, her signature stride, confident and rehearsed, slightly off-tempo. When the door closed behind her, she faced something she hadn't faced in years. A room she couldn't control. Captain Lane didn't speak right away. He simply gestured toward the headset resting on the co-pilot's console. Lauren hesitated, then slipped it over her ears. A voice crackled to life, cold, measured, and unfamiliar. "Miss Grady, this is James Mercer, FAA Senior Investigator, speaking on behalf of Director Olivia Carter." The air in the cockpit dropped 10 degrees. Lauren's spine stiffened. "Yes, sir? We've received a formal complaint that you removed a first-class miner from her assigned seat without verifying her boarding pass with either the flight manifest or ground crew. Is that correct?" Lauren swallowed. "I looked at the ticket. It didn't match the passenger." "Did you scan the barcode?" She froze. Did you compare it against the manifest?" A pause. The sound of the captain's fingers drumming lightly on the throttle controls echoed. Lauren's voice faltered. "No, I made a judgment call. Based on?" The silence was a scalpel. Her throat tightened. "She didn't appear to be a first-class passenger." The words hung in the cockpit like smoke, thick, ugly, impossible to breathe around. "So you removed a black teenage girl from a seat that matched her ticket because of how she looked?" "I didn't say that," Lauren blurted. "You didn't have to." In the back of the plane, Imani Carter stared at the seatbelt sign above her. Her phone buzzed softly in her lap. "She's in the cockpit now. Be ready." The message from Olivia didn't surprise her. Imani didn't move. She didn't tap out a reply. She just waited. She'd done enough explaining. Now it was their turn. Back in the cockpit, the voice continued. "Miss Grady, you are to escort the passenger back to her original seat immediately. You will offer a full verbal apology in the presence of other passengers. Until this is done, the flight remains grounded." Lauren's voice shrank to a whisper. "And after that, we'll be waiting when you land." The line went dead. Captain Lane said nothing. He didn't have to. Lauren pulled off the headset with trembling hands. She had never felt this kind of cold. Not from altitude. From consequence. The moment she stepped back into the cabin, everything felt heavier. The aisle, the eyes, even the floor beneath her heels. She walked slower than she ever had before, hands brushing the edge of her uniform. She passed business class, then the curtain, then coach. She didn't look at anyone. Until she saw her. Imani. Still sitting by the window, posture calm, arms folded neatly over her lap. Not a tear, not a slump, just presence. Lauren crouched slightly, attempting a smile she no longer believed in. "Miss Carter," she began, her voice softer but still tight. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat." Imani turned her head slowly. No expression, no reaction, just clarity. She didn't move right away. She let the moment breathe. Lauren's smile wavered. "I apologize for the confusion," she added quickly, nervously, "and for any inconvenience caused." Imani's eyes narrowed. "Confusion?" Lauren hesitated. "There was an error in the seating." Imani's voice came quiet but firm. "You looked at my ticket. You saw the seat number. You still told me to move." A few passengers nearby tilted their heads subtly. Some remembered the earlier exchange. Now they were listening more closely. Lauren nodded once, lips pressed together. "I may have made a mistake in judgment." Imani reached down and pulled out her phone, typed something, sent it, then slipped the phone back in her hoodie pocket. She stood. "I'll go back," she said, steady as marble. "But I want to ask you something first." Lauren nodded again, cautiously. Imani looked directly into her eyes. Her words didn't rise, but their weight could crush. "Why did you assume I didn't belong in that seat?" Lauren opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You didn't ask anyone else for their ticket," Imani added. "Just me." "Why?" The cabin went silent. The plane wasn't moving, but it had never felt more off balance. Lauren's hands tightened at her sides. Her mouth finally moved. "I misjudged you." Imani didn't smile, didn't flinch. She nodded, picked up her backpack, and began walking toward the front of the plane. Lauren followed, the weight of every glance behind her dragging her step. They returned to seat 2A together. Imani sat, folded her hands again, stared straight ahead. Lauren stood beside her awkwardly. "If there's anything you need," she mumbled. Imani opened her book without looking up. The conversation was over. Lauren turned and walked back up the aisle. She passed the same passengers who had watched her earlier, then unsure, now unnerved. She disappeared behind the galley curtain like a shadow fleeing light. And in her absence, a strange hush fell over first class. Not peace, not comfort, but reckoning. Across the aisle, a man in a tailored suit leaned slightly toward Imani. I saw what happened earlier," he said, voice low. Imani didn't turn. "Did you? I mean, it was unfortunate." She finally looked up, her eyebrow raised. "Unfortunate?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Clearly a misunderstanding." She held his gaze. "You mean it was a choice?" His lips parted, then closed again. He leaned back slowly, unable to meet her eyes. Imani turned her focus back to her book. Her phone buzzed one last time. Make her say it. She already had. The plane was still. The kind of stillness that made your stomach tighten. Not from turbulence, but from tension. Seat belts were still fastened. Cabin lights still dimmed. But the wheels hadn't budged. There was no familiar rumble. No pressurized hiss of the aircraft detaching from the gate. Only silence. And the low buzz of whispers growing sharper with every passing minute. From her seat in 2A, Imani Carter didn't flinch. She didn't fidget. She simply sat, shoulders square, hands resting lightly on her backpack. She wasn't trying to look strong. She was simply refusing to look small. Across the aisle, a woman with a tablet whispered to the man beside her. "They're not moving the plane," she said. He checked his watch. "It's been almost 40 minutes." She glanced toward the galley, then leaned in closer. "Did you see what happened earlier?" He shook his head. "I was on a call." "Well," she said, voice low, "you missed something ugly." In the galley, Lauren Grady stood frozen. Her fingers gripped the edge of the metal counter. She wasn't sipping water anymore. She wasn't rearranging napkins. She was simply standing, as if stillness could hold off the storm she knew was coming. Across from her, Javier Cruz watched. His arms were crossed, his jaw clenched. "You really messed up," he said. Lauren didn't answer. Javier stepped closer. "She's not just some kid," he added. "Do you even know who her godmother is?" Lauren's voice was dry. "I know now." "Then you know this isn't going to stop at an apology." She closed her eyes briefly. "I did what I thought was right." "No," Javier said, his voice low but cutting. "You did what you assumed." She looked away. But the truth had already landed. Up in the cockpit, Captain Lane sat with arms folded, staring at the control panel he wasn't allowed to touch. The FAA's voice still echoed in his ears. "This is no longer an internal matter. You are to remain grounded. A compliance officer will meet the aircraft upon landing. Full documentation of crew behavior is now required." In over 2 decades of flying, Lane had never been held at the gate for this long without a mechanical issue. He had never received multiple direct calls from the FAA, and he had certainly never heard the name Olivia Carter spoken with such authority over a secured channel. This wasn't delay. This was judgment. Back in the cabin, Imani sat unmoving. The silence around her was no longer avoidance. It was discomfort, self-awareness, the kind of quiet that creeps in when people realize they witnessed something wrong and did nothing. A few passengers began to fidget. One rang the call button. Another adjusted their scarf 3 times in a row without noticing. Still no engine noise. Still no movement. In coach, an older woman leaned toward the window, then whispered to her seatmate, "They're not moving us because of that girl." The man frowned. "What girl?" She nodded toward first class. "The one they made move earlier. The flight attendant. She did something wrong, and now someone powerful is involved." He followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. "You're saying that's why we're still on the ground?" "She's not just any passenger," the woman replied. "And that flight attendant? She's in real trouble." In the galley, the phone rang. Not the usual crew intercom. The direct line from the flight deck. Javier picked it up, then handed it to Lauren wordlessly. She pressed it to her ear. A calm voice on the other end. "Miss Grady. This is Devin Mercer, FAA Compliance Officer. Upon landing, you will be escorted off the aircraft for formal questioning. This is not optional." Lauren's throat tightened. "Do not speak further with the passenger involved. Any additional comments may be recorded as part of the investigation." She nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Understood," she whispered. The line went dead. She lowered the phone, her hand shaking. This wasn't a complaint. This was a consequence. At the front of the cabin, Captain Lane stepped out once more, his expression unreadable, voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been advised to delay our departure due to a required compliance check. We appreciate your patience and will update you as soon as we're cleared by ground control." No one spoke. No one needed to. They felt it. This wasn't about safety protocol. This was about something human. And now it was institutional. Back in seat 2A, Imani pulled out her phone. A new message blinked on the screen. "FAA has flagged the flight. They're logging every crew action now. If anything else happens, tell me immediately." She locked the screen and set the phone on the tray table. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt focus. She had seen what happened when people like Lauren operated unchecked. But now? The system had stopped pretending not to notice. In the galley, Lauren sat on the fold-down jump seat, palms damp, thoughts racing. She thought of the moment she made the call, told the girl to move. She thought it had been routine, standard. Her word was final. No questions needed. Now the words that once gave her authority felt like evidence. "You don't belong here. Where are your parents? Move to the back." The echoes clawed at her memory. Javier leaned into the galley, voice low. "You should sit down before you faint." "I'm fine," she snapped, though her voice cracked. "No, you're not," he said. "You've been doing this long enough to know this won't blow over." She stared blankly ahead. "You'll have to explain everything to someone in a suit," he added, "and they're going to ask you what exactly you saw that made you remove a girl from her assigned seat." "I didn't drag her," she muttered. "No," Javier said, "you humiliated her, and you're only sorry now because someone important noticed." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked out, leaving her alone in the silence she used to command. And in first class, Imani exhaled, not from relief, but from something deeper, validation, not because someone believed her, but because the world couldn't ignore her anymore. The cabin door opened with a click, soft. But the energy that entered with it was anything but. Every passenger in rows 1 through 6 turned their heads, some instinctively, some slowly, some not at all, until they saw the badges. 2 figures stepped onto the plane. A woman in a black FAA uniform, her expression unreadable, and a man in a dark gray suit, his badge clipped high on his chest. They didn't smile. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply moved briskly, silently, cutting through the quiet like a blade. They weren't here for routine checks. They weren't here for a broken coffee machine. They were here because a 16-year-old black girl had been told she didn't belong, and someone at the top had decided that the entire system would stop until that was addressed. From her seat in 2A, Imani Carter saw them coming. She didn't look startled. She didn't straighten up. She was already ready. The officer stopped beside her row. "Miss Carter?" the woman asked. Imani turned her head, calm. Yes. My name is Officer Rhodes. I'm here on behalf of Director Olivia Carter. We'll be escorting you off the aircraft shortly. You'll be the last to disembark. Is that clear? Yes, Imani said, voice steady. The man in the suit added, we'll also be detaining a crew member for formal questioning. Please remain in your seat. Imani nodded once. She didn't ask who. She already knew. Further up the plane, in the galley, Lauren Grady stared blankly at the curtain. She had heard the footsteps. She had seen the moment Javier stepped back, leaving space for them to enter. Now she watched as the supervisor approached her, flanked by a uniformed security officer. Miss Grady, the supervisor said, quietly but firmly, you'll need to come with us. She stood. Slowly. Not because she was resisting, but because her legs had gone heavy. As she stepped into the aisle, the plane didn't make a sound. Not a cough, not a sigh, not even the buzz of overhead lights. Just eyes. Hundreds of them, watching. She walked forward, guided by the uniformed guard, her spine rigid but her face pale. She wasn't in handcuffs, but she might as well have been. And as she passed seat 2A, she paused. Just for a second. She turned her head, met Imani's eyes. Imani didn't blink, she didn't glare, she didn't forgive, she just looked back. And somehow that was worse. Lauren lowered her eyes and kept walking. No one clapped, no one cheered. But the shame in the silence was louder than any applause. As she disappeared into the jet bridge, a man leaned toward his seatmate. She's the reason we never left the gate. Another passenger added, she just lost everything. And no one argued. Because they all knew it was true. Back in the galley, Lauren was handed off to FAA officials. Outside the aircraft, a black SUV with government plates idled quietly near the terminal. Inside, a clipboard awaited. An FAA investigator. And no script to save her. Lauren had always prided herself on control, on enforcing rules, on being unflinching. But now she was the subject. No uniform could protect her. No years of service could erase what she'd said aloud. You don't belong. Back in 2A, Imani remained seated, hands folded, phone face down on the tray table. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't fought. She hadn't even demanded. She had simply refused to disappear. And now the cabin around her was paying attention. Javier walked down the aisle and stopped beside her. They'll call you when it's time, he said gently. Imani nodded. I know. He lingered for a moment, like he wanted to say something more, but all he offered was a small nod of respect, not pity, not guilt, just recognition. And then he moved on. One by one, passengers began to shuffle out, row by row, quiet, awkward. No one looked at Imani directly, but their glances slid toward her like guilt in motion. The man who had called her situation unfortunate earlier, he didn't even try to meet her eyes. The woman beside him who had stayed silent, now sat with her hands clasped too tightly to speak. No one said a word, but their silence was no longer passive, it was admission. Inside the terminal, a small crowd of airline executives and FAA staff waited. None of them carried smiles, only folders, tablets, compliance reports, and at the front of that group, tall, composed, unmistakable, stood Dr. Olivia Carter. No entourage, no title badge, just presence, just power. Just the woman who had grounded an entire plane with one message. The cockpit door opened one last time. Miss Carter, Officer Rhodes said gently, stepping back into the cabin. We're ready for you. Imani stood. Not quickly, not slowly, just intentionally. She slung her backpack over one shoulder and took one final look around the cabin where it had all begun. She had boarded quietly. She had followed the rules. She had taken her seat. And for that, she had been made to feel less. But she hadn't stayed there. She hadn't shrunk. She hadn't snapped. She had simply spoken the truth and let it speak for her. As she stepped into the jet bridge, Javier moved aside to let her pass. You handled that better than most grown adults would have, he said softly. Imani looked at him, her voice quiet, clear. I didn't come to fight, she said. I just came to fly. He nodded once and said nothing more, because there was nothing else to say. At the end of the walkway, Olivia stood waiting. She didn't rush forward. She didn't hug her. She simply placed a steady hand on Imani's shoulder. You all right? She asked. I'm fine, Imani said. You want to talk about it? Not yet. Olivia nodded. You did exactly what you needed to do. Together, they walked down the terminal, past the agents, past the murmurs, and into something far bigger than a plane. The story broke the next morning. It started small. A paragraph buried in an aviation newsletter, barely a headline. FAA grounds flight over passenger complaint, internal review underway. But by lunchtime it was everywhere. What had begun as a single text from a 16-year-old girl had now become a national reckoning. Within hours, footage leaked, passengers whispering on board, Lauren Grady being escorted down the aisle, Imani Carter sitting quietly in 2A, unmoving, unreadable. And across every platform, 3 words began trending: she never moved. Inside the headquarters of Skybridge Airlines, a private conference room buzzed with silence. The company's CEO, board members, legal advisors, HR heads, and operations leads all sat stiffly around a polished oval table. Each had a printed packet in front of them. Inside, a transcript of the FAA's initial findings, a detailed report from Captain Lane, passenger statements, crew interviews, and one still image that none of them could stop looking at. Imani Carter in 2A, her eyes calm, her posture strong. She didn't raise her voice, someone finally said. She didn't even argue. She didn't need to, the CEO replied quietly. She had the truth, and the wrong person picked the wrong passenger. Another voice chimed in. Legal counsel. The FAA has already flagged this as a compliance breach. They're requesting mandatory bias retraining across all departments. Grady is on unpaid leave. Based on our findings, reinstatement is not recommended. Silence. Then the CEO turned to the head of customer operations. I want a full internal overhaul, public statement within 48 hours, and make one thing clear. He tapped his finger once on the folder. Respect isn't based on appearance. It's the cost of admission for every seat. Back in D.C., Olivia Carter sat alone in her apartment, her shoes off, her laptop open. She didn't smile as she read through the draft of the new FAA passenger dignity protocol she was writing, because she wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to make sure this never happened again. Behind her, Imani sat curled on the sofa, hoodie pulled low, a warm mug in her hands. You don't have to work tonight, Imani said softly. Olivia glanced back. I'm not tired. A pause. You always said change is slow. Olivia nodded. It is. Then she looked her goddaughter in the eye. But sometimes, someone refuses to stay quiet, and suddenly everything starts moving faster. The next day, every crew member at Skybridge Airlines received a new training alert. Mandatory, not optional. Included in the training video, a reenactment of Flight 263, a directive from the FAA, and a new phrase projected in bold on the final slide: bias has no seat on board. Elsewhere, at a high school in Georgia, a teacher handed out a case study. The title, How One Girl Grounded a System That Refused to See Her. A 15-year-old girl raised her hand. Was she scared? She asked. Imani, now standing in front of the class, paused. Yeah, she said honestly. I was. Then, how did you stay so calm? Imani smiled, small but certain. Because I knew I didn't do anything wrong, and I knew someone had my back. Weeks later, Imani flew again. No attention, no incident, just a girl in 3F this time watching clouds drift outside the window. A flight attendant approached during the meal service. She didn't ask for a ticket. She just smiled gently. I read about you, in training. Imani looked up, surprised. I just want to say thank you, the attendant added. It changed the way I see people. Imani didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Thank you for seeing me. And at the next FAA Leadership Summit, Olivia Carter took the stage. She didn't name her goddaughter. She didn't need to. She just said this. In aviation, we talk a lot about turbulence, about storms and engines and flight paths, but the most dangerous turbulence isn't in the sky. It's in our judgment, in the snap decisions made without evidence, in the moments where silence enables injustice. That's the kind of turbulence trust, and from now on, we land that too. That night back home, Imani sat on the porch with Olivia. The stars blinked faintly above. The world had calmed. I keep thinking about what she said, Imani murmured. That I didn't look like I belonged. Olivia didn't speak. She just waited. Now every time I walk into a room or board a plane, I don't wonder anymore. She looked out at the night sky. I just sit. Olivia smiled softly. That's because you always belonged. You just reminded them. She didn't need a spotlight. She didn't want headlines. She wanted peace, a seat, a journey without fear. And somehow, in asking for only that, she gave the world something more. Not by yelling, not by protesting, but by sitting still and telling the truth. One girl, one call, and an entire industry was forced to listen. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, tell us what you would have done. And if you believe in justice, dignity, and stories that spark change, subscribe to Aiva Stories, because every time someone listens, speaks up, or even just sits down and tells the truth, the world shifts. Be part of that shift. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and don't miss the next story that deserves to be heard.